Every once in a while I make a video where I feel like I'm poking a very large, very unstable bear. This is one of those videos. Hi, welcome to this episode of The Bald Book Geek. I'm Darth James, let's just get into it. Because today we're talking about fanfiction, Tumblr culture, tagging wars, and this slow creeping shift where the internet went from write what you want to write what won't get you yelled at by a teenager with a cartoon picture profile. And yes, I've written fanfiction. We all have. And if you haven't, you're lying or you called it practice writing in a notebook when you were 13. I made a video a while back about how fanfiction has slowly kind of bleeding into traditional publishing, but I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to look at how the sort of post-LiveJournal era, that era, where every writer migrated to Tumblr like the promised land, completely rewiring writing culture and not always for the better. Okay, let's see how much mess this makes. This video is sponsored by the original Smooth Geezer head shaver, the quickest, easiest way to keep my head smooth without the whole wet shaving mess. It's designed for fast, dry shaving, no water, no foam, no fuss. Just pick up, glide it over your head, and you're done. Cleanup takes seconds. If you want to try it yourself, the link's in the description, and you can also use my code WILL20 to get money off your first order. Thanks to Smooth Geezer for supporting this channel. Now back to the video. Before Tumblr, fanfiction lived on LiveJournal, fanfiction.net, niche forums, Yahoo groups if you're old enough to remember that horror. The vibe back then was different. It was messy, it was chaotic, and it was unhinged in the best way. Drama existed, of course. This is fandom, but it wasn't systematic. Then LiveJournal declined, and when it did, the mess migrated to Tumblr. Maybe we need to have this narrated by David Attenborough, let's be honest. Tumblr felt like the promised land. No character limits, easy reblogs, GIFs everywhere, a community obsessed with art and reading. It was genuinely a brilliant space for creatives. But Tumblr also came with something else. The emergence of fandom as a moral identity. Before Tumblr, liking a thing didn't require you to sign a social contract. Once Tumblr took over, fandom became a personality test and a purity test rolled into one. So let's talk about Tumblr culture itself, because Tumblr wasn't just a website, it became a worldview. Tumblr rewarded performative empathy, moral stances, public outcries, communal outrage, identity-based politics applied to fictional characters, the ability to turn any discourse into an ethical argument. It was the birthplace of problematic versus unproblematic. XYZ ship is abusive, and therefore the person who ships it is also abusive. Fiction equals endorsement. Headcanons are a moral stance. Purity culture, but make it left-leaning. Tumblr created an environment where people had to constantly prove they were the good kind of fan, because Tumblr had no real algorithm then. Discourse spread like wildfire in a dry summer. One big blog said something, 20,000 people reblogged it, and suddenly it was a war. This rewired an entire generation of writers. And I mean that. And it rewired me at one point. Yes, I was very big on Tumblr at one point, but mine was fashion. We do not talk about those photos. Originally, tagging was meant to be something simple, helpful, and practical. You tagged the ship, the kink, the fandom, character death if you were being nice, but somewhere around 2013 to 2014, tagging mutated. Tags became moral disclaimers, safety warnings, ethical positioning statements. Instead of here's what's in my story, it became here's proof I'm not a bad person for writing this story. You had to tag everything. Minor angst, major angst, implied angst. Hurt, comfort, but maybe less hurt than you think. Not smut, sorry, yes smut, sorry, character death, potential character death. Might be sad vibe, sorry. This character breathes aggressively in Chapter 7. It turned into this fence, for best way to put it. A fence around the work. But the real thing that kind of stayed, people started demanding that writers tagged spoilers. Not themes, spoilers. How dare you not warn me that the main character dies? I was emotionally unprepared. Yes, that's the point. That's literally how storytelling works. But Tumblr decided discomfort equals harm, and harm is the writer's fault. And that's how we got here. Someone in my comments once said, adopting trigger warnings as everyday fandom labels was the biggest mistake the writing community ever made, and that hit me like a brick. Trigger warnings used to be a clinical tool, used in a therapeutic context. Serious things, not fandom shorthand. But when Tumblr co-opted the term, it became a catch-all for feelings, a badge of compassion, a moral requirement, and suddenly the writer became responsible for every possible reaction the reader might have. But here's an uncomfortable truth. Self-responsibility vanished. If someone felt uncomfortable, the writer was to blame. If the story touched on difficult themes, the writer was accused of glorifying it. If a character made a mistake, the writer was morally judged. It was exhausting, and it turned writing into a performance of emotional safety rather than art. This is the part that people don't want to talk about. Tumblr culture didn't stay on Tumblr. It spilled out like a cracked bottle of glitter, impossible to clean up and sticking to everything. It migrated to Tumblr massively, Discord, BookTok, writing communities, publishing spaces, sensitivity reading discourse, online workshops, university writing departments, and now you see this Tumblr logic everywhere. In traditional publishing, publishers are now including content warnings, themes you might find distressing sections, disclaimers at the start of the books. Books are being sensitively read to the point of thematic sterilization. Risk-taking is discouraged. Anything morally ambiguous gets flagged. Characters aren't allowed to be messy without a foreword explaining that the author does not endorse bad behaviour. This is Tumblr discourse in a blazer and glasses. In indie publishing, indie authors are terrified of being review bombed. They're terrified of being problematic. They're terrified of the moral police showing up in Goodreads like an angry PTA meeting. So they overtag, they overexplain, they sanitize. People are afraid to, and this is in the writing community, write flawed characters, explore dark themes, surprise readers, write villains without disclaimers, write anything that could be misinterpreted. Everybody's walking on eggshells. In book discourse online, you see reviews like, I didn't like that the villain did a bad thing. This story had morally grey characters and they didn't take their shirts off. It's harmful. I felt uncomfortable. The author is problematic. All of it is Tumblr. All of it. And it's sad that this culture has crept into art. Full stop, not just writing. For this kind of deep dive, I spent way too much time on Tumblr archives, Discord servers, fandom drama blogs, AO3 community threads, fanfic writers' private chats, TikTok videos about content warnings, depressed writers' subreddits. And the emotion I felt everywhere was fear. Not happiness, not creativity, not passion, fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing, forgetting a tag, being misinterpreted, writing a trope that someone deems harmful, being screenshotted and circulated, being called problematic by a bunch of strangers on the internet. People are censoring themselves before they even write a single sentence. This is the saddest thing of all. I know it sounds pretentious, but I believe it. The artist is not responsible for the consumer. The reader has responsibility for their own boundaries, their own habits, their own choices. Stories are meant to challenge, provoke, surprise, unsettle, entertain, and make you feel things, good, bad, and horrifying. Not all stories are meant to be safe. Not all stories are meant for you. That's okay, that's healthy. When I was a writer, I never sat down and thought, I hope someone doesn't get upset over this. I thought, does this serve the story? Because that's the job. A character dying is not a moral failure. A dark theme is not an endorsement. A twist is not a breach of trust. Stories for the reader are not therapy sessions. Writers are not emotional support animals or your babysitter. Here's the heart of the issue. Tumblr blurred the lines between fiction and reality in a way, and we see it on Twitter to this day. Those lines in fandom spaces between fictional characters and reality are so blurry, it's actually bordering unhealthy. But those lines also got blurred with fiction and morality, character behaviour and author intent, discomfort and harm, boundaries and censorship, reader's responsibility and writer's responsibility. Tumblr turned fandom into a purity hierarchy, where the good fans are the ones who only consume sanitized, ethically approved fiction. This mindset rules the internet now. If a character does something wrong, the writer gets blamed. If a character is toxic, the reader gets judged for enjoying a story. Fiction stopped being fiction, it became an ethical essay. No wonder creativity feels dead in so many spaces now. So honestly, where do we go from here? Here's what I want writers, fanfic or otherwise, published, traditional or indie, to hear. You are allowed to write what the hell you want. You are not obligated or responsible in any way for the reader, and you are not obligated to protect every stranger's emotional state, tag every plot twist, sanitize difficult themes, justify your imagination, apologize for fictional events. You're allowed to be messy, you're allowed to surprise people. You're allowed to write flawed characters who do bad, horrible things. You do not owe the internet a moral performance. And if someone gets offended, that's a them problem, not a you problem. It's okay, they can stop reading, they can put the book down. It's simple. We need to bring back creative risk, moral ambiguity, complexity, stories that hurt, in a good way, stories that challenge, stories that aren't scared of teenagers on the internet or people who still behave like teenagers on the internet. Because the alternative is, say, fiction, predictable fiction. Fiction written by committee, and nobody wants that. I certainly don't as a reader. So here's my deeper, slightly unhinged, probably career-ending dive into how Tumblr culture broke fiction, fanfiction, and writing, and warped the writing communities and left fingerprints on publishing as a whole. If you've got stories from the LiveJournal era, or if you've ever been yelled at for forgetting a tag, drop it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this sprawling rant, hit like, hype, subscribe, and ring that bell. I'll see you in the next one, unless Tumblr finds me first. And don't forget, if you want early access, ad-free content, or just want to support this channel, check out Substack, channel memberships, Patreon, and Ko-fi. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.